Welcome to Book Talk. My name is Buffy Catella. I'm joined here with
Jay Pilkington.
So, Jay, we're here to talk about your book.
Buffy.
We're here to talk about your book that you are currently writing and is not done. So it doesn't have a name or anything. But
it actually does.
Oh, it does have a name.
Yes, and one of the things I knew you put in your list of questions, do you have a publisher? No. Do I think I will have a publisher? No. But if I did have somebody guiding me, they might suggest a different title. But I came up with the Sports Exchange. Now, maybe that's a play on the stock exchange or things like that. But I wanted to try to be clever and have something a little bit different. But the genesis of it was the exchanges between professional athletes during usually the heat of battle during a game. But, ultimately, if I back up just a little bit, the whole reason behind the book, hopefully I don't lose anybody or you on this, but I used to, I mentioned I'm an IT consultant, and I used to work for a very large global consulting firm, and we worked usually with Fortune 100 companies. I would be on a plane every Sunday and came home Thursdays, usually 3 weeks out of the month. And I was always reading books on the planes. I would fly to Los Angeles or Houston or things like that. So I had a lot of time to kill and would always enjoy a good book. I had a hard time, and I'm a big sports fan. There's many people in the world like me. I had a hard time finding books that I thought were interesting. And I would buy one. For every 10 books I bought, one seemed really of interest and had a clever perspective or things like that. And as I would always watch games, I watched all sports. I'm a total homer from New England. So Patriots, Bruins, Red Sox, Celtics. You'd watch the games, and I was a big fan. I brought up Larry Bird. Again, I'm in my 50s. Larry Bird was a very good basketball player, kind of changed the NBA with him and Magic Johnson and then Michael Jordan. And I always enjoyed watching, and it was interesting. Larry Bird was drafted as a junior in college. Red Auerbach, if you know who that name is, he was the, general manager of the Celtics for decades, one of the most successful coaches and GMs. And he did something relatively unique, is that he knew Larry Bird he believed he was going to be an unbelievably successful basketball player in the NBA. And he knew that as young as his junior year. Now, it's interesting. Again, I'm dating myself. I think a lot of kids are one and done in college now, where they have a successful freshman year and then boom, they're drafted. But that was not the case back in the 80s. And so Larry Bird, it was pretty much a shoo-in that he was going to be one of the most sought after college players. And as a junior, there were no rules. Now they call it the Auerbach rule, where you can't draft a kid until he declares that he's no longer going to play college ball. So Auerbach drafted him as a junior and then just sat back and watched him play his senior year. He went to Indiana State, the Sycamores, not Indiana University. So that was pretty interesting story in and of itself. But as you follow players that become your favorite players, and usually the most popular ones, you kind of like to know where they went to college and who they are as people and what they do outside of the game and how they do their practices in the off season and when they get traded and all that different stuff. And I was one of those people and always enjoyed knowing as much as I could about certain players. And one of the things that just struck me once, you talked about you played baseball. I was watching a Major League Baseball game one time, and remember Big Papi, David
Yeah,
Ortiz.
of course. Yeah, I read his book, actually.
As did I. Did you also know a guy named Kevin Millar?
That sounds familiar. But
he was when the Red Sox started winning championships in 03, 04, that time frame. And Millar was he was, I think, a very average player, but he was a hot ticket, always getting his teammates laughing and things like that. Well, he got traded from the Red Sox to the Orioles. And I remember a game the Red Sox were playing. Big Papi gets up, he gets a single, and Millar is playing first base. Ortiz gets a single, and they're both just laughing their you-know-what's off, going back and forth, and Millar's talking into his glove. And that's when this epiphany or this idea for a book struck me, was like, I would love to hear what they're talking about. Some of the ones that I found extremely interesting that I would give anything to know. And again, I felt like as a sports fan, I knew a ton about the different players, and I had this thirst to know more. And when you watch them on the ice, on the field, on the baseball diamond, or on the court, there were oftentimes these exchanges back and forth. With hockey, it's usually not, hey, sorry I bumped into you. It's bleep, 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 you son of a bleep, and bleep. And I was so interested to know what they were going back and forth about. So that was really the thought behind this book, is to interview some of these more prominent players that people would know, that they would care about, and to have stories that would be of interest that they probably in all likelihood had never heard before.
When you usually think of those exchanges, at least I always think about like the negative ones, but there are funny ones that happen too with friends, because a lot of the times they are, even if they're on different teams, they're still friends or they're enemies or whatever. Who knows? But I especially I think about hockey, and I know everybody loves a good hockey fight, but do we really, is it necessary at this point? No other sport kind of does that. If someone tries to fight, then, there's usually suspensions, but in hockey, they're like, yeah, we got to drop the gloves. And I know that it's cool, I guess, but is it needed? Do you know what I mean?
Well, and again, depending on how old you are, there were fights, fighting was allowed in the NHL. You could get a penalty for fighting. It wasn't that taboo. It's obviously changed a bunch now. But back then, there were 3 goons on every team.
Exactly.
And there were, it was like, what are they fighting about? Just for no particular reason. So now if there are skirmishes, maybe there's a little bit more intrigue to be like, whoa, I wonder what was going on there. And one of the things I was going to screen share, I may not even disrupt the flow of the video here, but if you think of that guy, Larry Bird, that I mentioned,
yes.
Did you ever know of a guy, Julius Erving or Dr. J?
No.
So one of the best NBA players at the time, played for the Philadelphia 76ers, actually went to UMass Amherst, hilarious, but he was unbelievably talented, and he was one of the first guys that sort of played above the rim. He was always dunking the ball and things like that. And he was also a very well-respected, he was not much of a trash talker or, beating his chest after every time he scored a basket. He was quite reserved, quite humbled, and so was Bird. He was a big trash talker. Scratch that. But I think Bird had a almost league-wide respect as just being an unbelievably talented basketball player. So it was extremely shocking one time where they're battling, and the Celtics and 76ers in the early 80s were nemesises, just like the LA Lakers. And the competition got to a boiling point, and Bird and Irving ended up fighting one another. And there's a picture, if you look up afterwards, but they're both standing there with their hand on each other's throat. And I've always wondered what was said to finally get both of them to engage. And this one actually, to me, has a lot of intrigue, because both of them have always sworn that they will never talk about it. So for people that are really sports hounds, that really get into those details and, really kind of have this affinity or I loved Larry Bird. He was unbelievable. And I thought Dr. J was pretty awesome as well. But of course, you were a homer. You liked your own player more. But I respected Irving, and I really wondered what could have been said. There could have been some pushing and shoving, but after this interview, go look up Larry Bird, Julius Irving, and you'll see the picture. And they're not just sort of putting Irving is squeezing the windpipe of Bird. And you just want, and again, anytime they got asked about it, they're like, no, I'm not going to discuss it. So that one is a story I would love to get.
Well, there must be something that is something must have been said. Where I think the problem is that sometimes people just they cross the line. They take it. There's a difference between trash talking and then actually like saying, stuff that is just horrible. Which is probably, my guess is that's probably what happened. I don't know. They probably just egged each other on so much.
I'm going to probably just throw myself over the edge of the cliff as being a curmudgeonly old guy, but it really never happened, or it rarely happened. And I don't want to say that in today's, you Gen X's or you millennials, it's all you guys. I have kids that are 26 and 22 and almost 21. And I just think that stuff happens a heck of a lot more frequently, especially in basketball. It didn't really happen all that much back in the day. So when it did, it was more...
It was a bigger deal.
Absolutely. Well said.
Yeah, thank you. But no, I totally understand what you're talking about. And it's interesting how you said that you don't have a publisher and you're going to try and self-publish it. But how far in the book, I guess, in the writing process are you? Do you think you're like a quarter of the way done, halfway? Like how many interviews?
So, I think the content itself, which is either going to make it a very thin book of 8 pages, which of course it never would be, each chapter is going to be an interview with a particular player. I've only interviewed 4 players to date. So one guy is a guy named Steve Grogan, who used to be the quarterback for the New England Patriots back in the 70s and 80s. And a lot of people, again, if you ask your parents, Grogan was awesome. And it was interesting. He held the record up until a couple years ago when Cam Newton broke it, the current Patriots quarterback. But for the most rushing touchdowns in a season by a quarterback, it didn't happen that much. And Grogan, I think, scored 12 touchdowns one year. And that was very the record stood for a long, long time. But he was just a tough, no-frills, gritty quarterback. And I think most people that were fans of the Patriots loved the guy. Then there was a guy, Tony Eason, that they drafted who was terrible, and he was the antithesis of Grogan. But I interviewed Grogan. He owns a sporting goods store down Southern Mass, and he was just the nicest guy. And I got a couple of good tidbits from him. And so as you talk about, how's the book, I think if I interviewed Larry Bird, I would probably get 10 or 15 pages worth of content. This guy, Lyndon Byers, or LB, who played for the Bruins, he was a goon. And his job was to go out and either, pummel somebody because they ran one of our better players or just to try to get the team fired up. He has an unbelievable amount of content that, I would ask them, hey, I'm going to record our conversation. Is that okay? Yep, go for it. And so he and I talked for about an hour and a half over at a pub in Hudson, the Horseshoe Pub. And he had a lot of really good content. So that's where the book is going to fill itself out, is the more people I can interview. And so, again, I'm only four people in. I think if I have probably 10 or 15, that should be enough. And then I've got to be able to hopefully come out of the interview. I pick people that I think are going to be, have something relevant or colorful to say. That's kind of where I'm at. I got to get more people. Does the name Cam Neely ring a bell?
Yes.
So not only the current president of the Bruins, but I love that guy. I mean, man love. He was just he created the term power forward. So he's 6'2", 6'3", 210, 220. Unbelievable scorer. He scored 50 goals in 38 games or 39 games after coming off a brutal knee injury. And not only was I thought he was like a Larry Bird, just did his job. If he needed to go to task with somebody, he was one of the most ferocious fighters in the league, but he was also skilled and he could score, check people through the boards. And I would think, you being the goalie, Neely hung out in front of the net quite a bit. He wasn't the best puck handler in the world, but, tip shots, get rebounds. He created a lot of space for himself because he was the prototypical power forward. And I've been trying so hard to get Neely to let me interview him. If you look up I'm going to send you an email after this of the things that I'm referencing about John Winsink and all this stuff. But Neely, there was this guy, Claude Lemieux. He used to play for the Montreal Canadiens.
Yeah, I know him too. Yeah.
So when he was on the New Jersey Devils, one of the things that teams learned is that Neely couldn't hurt them if he was in the penalty box or thrown out of the game. And Lemieux just goaded him into a fight. Neely started fighting him. Lemieux turtled. Neely takes him from the back of his jersey because he's in a ball on the ice, and he throws him headfirst into the boards. I still get goosebumps. And he threw him with some pretty good velocity. So they throw Neely out of the game. Lemieux gets to keep playing. Bruins lost the game. But you just wonder what was being said, what was being talked about, and the stuff that Neely must have heard because, again, that was just the game he played,
I don't know what else to say to that. That's so true. There's so many different, and I guess I think of hockey the most just because that's, I'm most familiar with the hockey trash talking stuff, chirping as we like to call it. But yeah, these stories, they're rich, and you're like, what are they saying? Because you're right. You can't hear what they're saying. You can only see it, and oftentimes, the cameras they like to stay in the wide, so you can't see can't lip read and everything. So
I think they deliberately don't record because the profanity would be off the charts, which is an interesting thing that we're kind of seeing and experiencing now with COVID, and there's nobody in the stands, is that, like a football game, you're hearing a lot more than you ever heard, and it's not, oh, hey, nice tackle.
So how has the writing process been for you? Were you a writer before this, or is this your first attempt at writing really anything?
Definitely, this is my first attempt at writing a book or anything even on par. I would admit that I think I was a terrible student in high school when it came to English class. I was more interested in, sports and chasing girls and things like that. And I did terribly in those classes. I think I'm a relatively smart individual, but I was never good at transferring thoughts and doing it efficiently, coherently. You can vomit a bunch of words onto a page, but if you don't state your thesis in the beginning, give supporting examples to prove your thesis, and then conclude. And of course, if you're writing a book, I think you want to do it a little bit more colorfully. But I think I've gotten a lot better over the years. Again, being in sales, you have to try to craft an email or a proposal in a way that convinces the person you're trying to do business with or company you're trying to do business with, hey, this guy heard what we were talking about. They know the problems that we're having. I'd like to do business with this guy. So I think that has given me an opportunity to refine and become a better writer, but I have no idea when I write this book. I hope I do it in a good way. And, how's the process been? I don't think it's so much the writing, because I think the interviews and the players themselves are going to make it easy to put content out there. Again, talking about this guy, John Wensing. Well, I don't have to try to, ruminate about a way to describe him. If I just am able to type that example of him skating over to the Minnesota North Star bench or going into the crowd at Madison Square, I think that kind of paints the picture well enough on its own. So I think that part's going to be easy. Just getting the people to talk has been the hardest part.
Yeah, because some people.
Any suggestions or recommendations for me there, you ex-athlete, you?
How to talk to people? Like how to get people?
How to get them, how do you get Pedro Martinez to, I try to go on Twitter. I try to find their agents. Alex Ovechkin?
Yes. Oh, yes. Of course I know Ovechkin, yeah.
Of course you do. So I was able to get in touch with his agent to tell him what I'm trying to do and see if I could, set up an interview. And he's like, no. Good idea, good luck, but no. So I think there's got to be this sort of corresponding relationship between the level of popularity of the athlete and the difficulty in getting them to do an interview. If you go to interview somebody that played for the Red Sox for one season in the mid-'80s, you can get that guy all day long. But nobody's going to really care, I think, when it comes to reading the book because, I can't think of a player from the 80s that was insignificant. But my point being, you kind of need to get the people that when somebody looks at the book, I sort of PowerPointed a potential cover where it shows Larry Bird and Cam Neely tuning up Ulf Samuelsson or Steve Grogan, stuff like that, so that when somebody looks at the book and looks at the table of contents, he's going to go, oh, geez, I can't wait to read the story about this player or that player.
Yeah.
So that's the toughest part, is getting people that I think were some of the more popular pro athletes that their stories are going to be more of interest.
I see what you mean, and I think there definitely is probably a correlation of, higher paid athlete, or I guess higher notoriety, and like wanting to do something like this. Maybe there's like an unspoken rule where it's we can't kiss and tell, if that makes any sense, or that type of environment. I'm not really sure, and maybe they're too recently. It's too recent. Maybe the people that are willing to do something like this, that maybe they played, like you said, played in the 80s or the 90s, and they're like far away from it at this point.
But hopefully some of the other things that I can bring up, Steve Grogan, the guy I was talking about, he had this one story about probably one of the best offensive linemen of all time was a guy named John Hanna. I know you won't know who that is, but when you go back and look him up, this guy was unbelievable. Relatively small compared to today's standard. He was about 6'2", 280, but this guy was a tree trunk. And he, an offensive lineman, if you're dropping back to pass, you want him to be able to keep the defender from murdering your quarterback. But if
Yes.
it's a run, you want him to blow open a hole that the running back can run through. And this guy was feared as an offensive guard because of the devastation he could wreak on defenses, just blowing people up. And I actually got to meet him a couple times because I coached Pop Warner football in and around Bolton 15, 20 years ago. And I went to one of these camps where you got to meet some of the ex-pro athletes, and I got to talk with Hannah and actually go through some drills. And this guy in his late 50s was still a beast of a man. His thighs, are as big as tree trunks. And he's showing me how to, teach a kid blocking techniques. And again, I'm 6'4", 230. He's throwing me around like a piece of paper. And so when Grogan told this story about this guy, he was very reserved, never got in fights, wasn't a big talker. But one time they call a running play. The play happens. Hannah comes back to the huddle, and he's got this weird look on his face. And Grogan, the quarterback, says, John, hands, what's up? And he's like, I broke my finger. And his finger was just bent at like 45 degrees on his right hand, broke it. And he's like, oh, my God, I'll call a timeout. He's like, no, don't worry about it. So they run the next play. Hannah comes back to the huddle with another weird look on his face. And Grogan's like, what's up? He's like, I broke my other finger on my other hand. Stories like that, hopefully, that are comical, that somebody would just get a kick out of.
What is your goal as a writer?
I don't really have. That wasn't the motivation. I think it was self-centered, as I mentioned in the very beginning. I'm not even a big reader, but sitting on these airplanes, it was like, I would love to have a book like this. Exactly what I'm doing. Those types of stories would be of interest to me. And so, goal as a writer, I guess, is to, I don't know, give people similar to me something that they would go, I never knew that. I'll give you one other quick example. So talking about Larry Bird, there was this guy, Xavier McDaniel. This was one of, again, the genesis of the book. Xavier McDaniel played for the Seattle Supersonics. He was about 6'7", 6'8", unbelievable athlete, could touch the top of the backboard. He was most known for, blocking shots and incredible dunks and all this. Hell of a defender. And Bird was playing against him one day, and if you've ever heard any of the trash talking about Larry Bird, is that he would tell somebody what he was about to do and then do it. So he would come down the court, get a basket. Next time, as he's running back with the opponent, he's like, next time I'm going to drive the lane and I'm going to score over you with my left hand, doing a hook shot. And he would do it. So this thing at the end of a game against the Supersonics, they called timeout. There was like 6 seconds left in the game. It was a tight game. As they're walking off the court for the timeout to sort of huddle up, Bird gets McDaniels and says, I'm going to come right here. I'm going to fake baseline. I'm going to come back and I'm going to pull up and shoot a three-pointer in your face to win the game. You hear me? And McDaniels is just stupefied because he's an incredible defensive player. Sure enough, they run the play. Bird gets it, fakes baseline, does this, fades back, nails it. And as he's walking off the court, and they interviewed him after the game, it's like, hey, I saw you and X having a little back and forth, what was going on? And he's like, well, I told him I was going to do this. And then they said, well, you looked like you were pretty pissed off after you made the shot. And he was like, yeah, I left 2.2 seconds on the clock. I thought that story, if I could find out more of them, and that one's a relatively popular one that many people have talked about, but if I could ever unearth some similar gems, like when Neely is getting somebody putting a goalie stick up between his what, to hear about what was exchanged between them. That's the goal, is to share that stuff.
I think that's a good goal too, because there is a market, as we've talked about, and people, I think, want to know what's going on because there's more to sports than just the games, right? So people want that type of stuff. So is there anything else that you want to talk about or mention before we wrap up?
Do you remember the name Hal Gill? So he played with the Bruins in the early 2000s and, interestingly, grew up in Bolton, went to Neshoba, was a very good quarterback. He, obviously, Zdeno Chara.
Yes, of course, yes.
So Chara is not only well known for being a very good defenseman, but also one of the tallest players in NHL history. Well, Hal Gill was 6'7", and he came in right around the same time, was one of the tallest, biggest guys in the whole NHL. And the fact that he was a homegrown, Bolton kid and Massachusetts kid, I think he went to Providence College. I've been trying to get him to let me interview him, but I haven't been able to break through. And it was funny. I dated his sister in the 5th grade. And, I remember when Hal would run around the house in just his diapers, and I'm sure he'd love to hear me talk about that. But it was funny, one time I came home during Christmas break while I was in college, and a buddy of mine was married to his sister, and, Bolton's a pretty small town, so people know one another. So we're just playing a game of pickup hockey out on a pond, and I'm decent. I'm not that great, but I'm like, who is this tall kid who just keeps taking the puck from everybody? And my buddy Letty says, oh, that's Hal Gill. And I guess he was like a sophomore in high school, but he was already like 6'5", 6'6", and he could just reach halfway across the ice with his stick. And I'm like, wow, And then, of course, he goes on to play in the pros. He played for the Canadians, the Pittsburgh Penguins, the Predators. He lives down in Nashville now. I think he's a color commentary for the Predators. But his name's on the Stanley Cup a few times from Bolton. Went to Neshoba, and I'm connected with him on LinkedIn. I was like, "Hey, Hal, ever think you'd want to let me interview you for my book?" Haven't heard back from him. So I got work to do.
Yeah, obviously, but I'm interested in seeing where it goes. I really want, I don't know how long it's going to take for you to get the rest of the interviews and to finish the book, but once you finish the book, you're going to have to come back onto the show and tell me about all the news stories that you have found, and I guess the process of actually like self-publishing it and everything like that. So I'm really interested in seeing where this project goes. Do you have any social media that you want to plug, or an email or anything like that?
Not about this. I mean, I could go off on another tangent for an hour, but I won't. But I will say that I also have a similar hobby and passion, and this is a massive tangent, about muscle cars. So you're getting a brand new Jeep, but if you liked some of the older cars from like the 1960s or 70s when they were, Camaros and Corvettes and GTOs, I have this interesting little business and website where I know a lot about the really rare, hard to find, unbelievably expensive. There were a certain kind of Corvette called a Grand Sport. They made 5. And they each sell for about $1.5 million if you could ever find one now. So I'm doing that as a separate thing. So I guess I did just plug it, and I'm trying to see that hobby come to life, but it's going very slow. So that's my only plug, and wish me luck. If anybody who ever might watch this on YouTube, hey, my brother-in-law is such and such, let me know.
That would be helpful.
I'll give you a blurb in the book.
I know. I think that's all I have today, but thank you so much for coming on to the show. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you guys next week.